The wind reached Willow Bend before the train did. It came low over the platform, dragging grit across the boards, rattling a loose shutter on the ticket office, and settling dust on the shoulders of every traveler who stood waiting. Above the town, a rider sat his horse on the ridge line, still as a fence post, watching the tracks for smoke. He did not blink. He did not move. He only waited, the way a man waits when he has been paid to notice things other people miss. He was not waiting for the train. He was waiting for a girl. Down on the platform, that girl had no idea she was already being watched. Callie Shaw stood with both hands wrapped so tightly around the handle of her travel case that her knuckles had gone bloodless. She was 17, though she often told people 18 because 17 sounded like something that could still be sent back. For days of rattling train cars had left grit in her hair and a bruise-colored ache behind her eyes. She had eaten almost nothing since Ohio. She had slept even less. In her coat pocket, folded into a small hard square, was the only letter that had ever told her the truth plainly. "You are not needed here anymore." Her aunt had not even signed it with love. Just a name, the way a person signs a receipt. Callie had answered a notice in a farm paper 3 weeks before that letter came. A rancher. Widowed. Steady. Honest. Wanting a wife who could work and would not flinch from hard country. She had written back with a trembling hand and a truth she rarely gave anyone, that she was tired, and alone, and willing to trade almost anything for a door that would not be slammed on her. His name was Ezra Coltrane. She had never seen his face. The station at Willow Bend was small, one platform, one water tower, a general store with faded lettering, and a wide Montana sky that made a person feel like a coin dropped in an empty jar. Everyone around her seemed to belong to someone. A boy ran shrieking after a dog near the freight cars. A woman folded herself into a waiting husband's arms like she'd practiced the motion 1,000 times. Callie had no one waiting. Or so she believed, until a shadow fell across the boards in front of her and a voice, low and unhurried, said her name like it was something he intended to be careful with. "Miss Shaw." She turned too fast. The case banged her knee. The man in front of her was not what she'd built in her mind on the long ride west. She had pictured someone weathered and hard-eyed, a man made of leftover anger. Instead she found a tall figure in a sun-faded coat, dust on his boots, and a face that looked like it had learned long ago not to give too much away. Not cold. Just guarded. Like a house with the curtains drawn, waiting to see who was knocking before it decided whether to open. "I'm Callie," she managed. He took off his hat. It was such a small gesture, and yet it did something to the tight coil behind her ribs, loosened it, just slightly. "Ezra Coltrane," he said. "Sorry to make you find me instead of the other way around." "You didn't," she said quickly, the old habit of smoothing things over rising before she could stop it. His eyes moved over her face, not the way some men looked at a woman freshly stepped off a train, weighing her like livestock. He looked like he was checking for injury. For exhaustion. For fear. "Rough ride?" he asked. She almost gave him the answer she'd rehearsed. "Fine. No trouble." But something about the stillness in his gaze made the lie feel too heavy to lift. "It was long," she admitted. "And I was scared most of it." He didn't tell her she had nothing to fear. He didn't rush to comfort her, the way people sometimes did just to make her stop talking about hard things. He only nodded once, slow, like her fear deserved to be taken seriously. "I expect you were," he said. "Coming this far with nobody beside you takes more grit than most folks ever have to find." Grit. Not pity. Not a polite lie. Something that sounded almost like respect. She looked down fast, blinking hard, because if she looked at him a moment longer she was afraid of what her face might show. He held out a hand toward her case. "May I carry that?" She hesitated. In her experience, help always came with a cost attached, a favor owed, a silence expected, a debt she'd be reminded of later. He didn't reach for it a second time. He simply waited, and that waiting told her more than any speech could have. She let go. The wagon ride out of town passed a blacksmith's shed, a saloon with two men leaning in the doorway, a mercantile with flour sacks stacked by the entrance. Every set of eyes seemed to catch on her, then slide toward Ezra, then back again. She pulled her shawl tighter. "Willow Bend talks," Ezra said, watching the road instead of her. "Give it a day or two and you'll be old news." Is that meant to comfort me? Mostly it's meant to be true. She almost smiled. Almost. They climbed out of town into open country, grass rolling silver-green under the wind, distant mountains standing shoulder to shoulder like sleeping giants. Callie had grown up in rooms with walls too close and doors that never quite kept sound out. Here, even the silence had room to breathe. After nearly an hour of quiet, Ezra spoke again, his voice careful, like a man setting down something fragile. "I want to say a thing plainly, so there's no confusion between us." He kept his eyes on the road. "You answered a notice. I know that. But nothing has to be decided today, or tomorrow. Preacher comes through in 6 weeks. If you still want it then, we'll speak vows. If you don't, I'll see you get passage somewhere, or work here paid honest, whichever you choose." Callie stared at the side of his face. "You'd let me leave," she said slowly, "if I asked. If you asked, and had somewhere safe to go, or time to find one, yes." The simplicity of it frightened her more than any threat could have. She knew exactly what to do with cruelty, how to fold herself small under it, how to survive it quietly. But choice was a foreign country. A door left unlocked felt like a trick she hadn't learned the shape of yet. "Why," she whispered, "would you offer that?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because a woman shouldn't have to trade one kind of fear for another," he said at last, "and call it a home." She turned her face to the open land so he wouldn't see what those words did to her. By late afternoon, the ranch came into view between two low ridges, timber house, stone chimney, a barn with paint faded red by years of sun, chickens scratching near a fence, a blue shirt snapping on a clothesline like a small flag surrendering to the wind. It was not grand. It was not fine. But smoke curled from the chimney, and the windows caught the gold of the falling sun, and something in Callie's chest ached at the sight of it in a way she didn't have a name for yet. A boy came out of the barn carrying a feed bucket, stopped, and broke into a grin so open it looked like it might crack his face in half. "That's Sam Pruitt," Ezra said. "Helps around the place. Talks more than 3 men should." "Heard that," the boy called. "Meant you to," said Ezra. Sam jogged over, wiping one hand on his trousers. "Ma'am. You came all the way on the train. Did you see any outlaws? Do city girls really wear gloves to breakfast?" "Sam," Ezra said, "Do you wear gloves to breakfast?" The boy snapped his mouth shut, and for the first time in days, something close to a real laugh rose in Callie's chest. "I did come on the train," she told him. "No outlaws. And no gloves at breakfast, ever." Sam looked both crushed and delighted. "Well, glad you're here anyway. Such an easy welcome. Such a careless kindness." Callie had to grip the wagon seat before climbing down, because her legs had gone strangely unsteady. Ezra showed her the house himself. The kitchen smelled of coffee and wood smoke and bread baked with more heart than skill. In the front room sat one worn chair, a shelf of books, and a photograph turned face down on the mantel that he did not explain and she did not ask about. Upstairs, he stopped at a door at the end of the hall. "This one's yours," he said, stepping back to let her enter first. A narrow bed. A clean quilt. A washstand. A window that looked out over a stand of cottonwoods. On the small desk sat a lamp with fresh oil and a chipped blue cup holding 3 wildflowers, already beginning to droop. "Sam picked those," Ezra said. Said the room looked too empty. Her throat tightened. "There's a latch," he added, almost awkward now, nodding toward the door. "Hold strong." She turned to look at him. He didn't smile. He didn't make a speech out of it. He simply stood there and let her understand, in his silence, that he was giving her something she hadn't known how badly she needed. A room she could close against the world. A room no one could enter unless she allowed it. "Thank you," she said, her voice unsteady. "Supper when you're ready," he said. "No hurry." He left her there. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment before she trusted herself to move, then took the folded letter from her pocket and read the cruel line one final time. "You are not needed here anymore." She folded it smaller. Put it away in the desk drawer. Not burned. Not forgotten. Just, set down, for now. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, and somewhere below, she heard Sam laugh at something Ezra said, low and warm through the wooden floor. For the first time since leaving Ohio, Callie let herself breathe. But on the ridge above Cedar Hollow, the rider was still watching. He waited until the kitchen lamp glowed gold behind the curtains, until he was certain the girl had not run, and only then did he turn his horse back toward town, carrying word that the stranger from the east had arrived, and had not left. Part 1 continues below. Do not stop here. Message continues into the following section as one uninterrupted narration. Morning came pale gold over the cottonwoods, and a rooster crowed like he took the sunrise personally. Callie woke before the house stirred, and for one disoriented breath didn't know where she was. Her hand went searching for the wall that had always pressed too close in her aunt's house. There was no wall. There was a window brightening with dawn. A latch on the inside of a door that had not been touched all night. She dressed in her one good work dress, braided her hair with fingers that still trembled from old habit, and went downstairs to find the kitchen cold but tidy, flowers sacked against the wall, a coffee pot waiting, a loaf of bread on the table so heavy and lopsided it looked like it had fallen off a roof. She smiled before she meant to. It startled her, how easily it came. She tied on the apron hanging by the door and got to work, because standing idle in a strange place frightened her worse than anything. By the time Ezra came in from the barn, the coffee was hot, the biscuits were browning, and the table was set for 3. He stopped in the doorway and looked at all of it for a long moment. I hope you don't mind, Callie said quickly. I should have asked before I touched your kitchen. Mind? He stepped inside slowly, like he feared one wrong word might send her running upstairs. I've been eating my own cooking 6 years. You could burn every pan in this house and still improve things. She stared at him. His face stayed serious, but something behind his eyes had eased. Sam banged through the back door, sniffed the air, and stopped dead. Lord above. Real biscuits. Sam, Ezra warned. I mean it kindly, the boy said, already sitting. When Ezra pulled out the third chair and simply stood behind it, waiting, Callie understood she was meant to sit with them, not serve first and eat last, the way she'd learned to at her aunt's table. It was such a small thing. It nearly undid her anyway. She sat. That afternoon, exploring the pantry with the quiet purpose of a woman measuring the shape of a new life, Callie found nails stored beside tea, soap beside sugar, a grain sack chewed through by mice. By evening she had it sorted, mended, and listed in a notebook she found under a stack of old newspapers. Ezra stood in the doorway when he found her at it and said nothing for a long moment. I should have asked first, she said, old fear jumping fast in her chest. I can put it back if you'd rather. Why would I rather it worse? He picked up her notebook, read the tally of what would run short before winter. This is more sense than this pantry's seen in years. She let out a breath so small she barely heard it herself. Later, at the creek behind the cottonwoods, she told him her mother had loved moving water. He asked how old she'd been when her mother passed. 14, she said. He took off his hat, though there was no grave there, no funeral, only memory, and he said I'm sorry the way most people never managed, staying quiet inside the words instead of rushing past them. Then, watching the water, he told her about Rosalind. His wife. Dead of fever 2 winters after they built the house. Folks thought I placed the notice because I was tired of the work, he said. Ranch needs more than one pair of hands. But mostly, I think I was tired of eating supper across from an empty chair. Callie looked at the creek a long while before she answered. I know something about empty chairs. He looked at her then, and something passed between them that wasn't love, not yet, not even close, but recognition. The way one traveler recognizes another by the dust on their boots. 2 days later, Willow Bend already knew her name before she'd said it twice. She felt it in the way conversation dropped at the mercantile counter, in the way the storekeeper's wife studied her like she was checking whether the girl matched the shape gossip had already drawn. Callie kept her spine straight and her list steady in her hand: flour, salt, thread, a new latch for the coop. Practical list, the woman said. Practical house, I hope. That was when a voice spoke behind her, smooth as a blade someone had bothered to polish. So you're the Eastern girl. She turned to find a young man near the oat sacks, fair-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a wool coat too fine for morning chores, smiling the way a man smiles when he already believes he's won something. My father owns the bank, he said, before she'd even asked. Near half the notes in this valley. It wasn't information. It was a warning dressed as manners. How fortunate for him, she said. His smile thinned. You talk sharp for a girl new to this country. I talk plain, Callie said. Plain talk causes less trouble than pretty lies, in my experience. Ezra appeared at the end of the aisle before the man could answer, and the air in the store changed the moment he did. Bo, Ezra said, and the single word landed like a closed door. The man, Bo Whitfield, she would learn, tipped his hat with theatrical politeness and left without another word, but not before his eyes cut back to her once, cold and measuring. "I'm sorry," Ezra said once they were alone. "For what?" "Him. He thinks he owns more than his father's money." "Does he?" Ezra's jaw tightened before he answered. "His father, Cyrus Whitfield, holds paper on ranches from here to the Willow Bend. Careful man. Patient. Bo's neither." Callie folded her hands so he wouldn't see them shake. "Is your ranch one of them?" Ezra didn't answer right away, and that silence told her more than words could have. "The note on my south pasture," he said finally, "belonged to another lender for years. Whitfield bought it last spring." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her though she hadn't moved. "Is it safe?" "It has been." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." That night, after Sam had gone quiet in the bunk room and the lamp burned low over the kitchen table, Ezra brought out a battered ledger and set it in front of Callie like he was laying down something heavier than paper. She opened it. Read slowly, then faster. Traced one line back 3 pages with her finger. "This payment," she said. "Why did it rise in June?" Whitfield said insurance fees were added after the transfer. "Was that in the original terms?" "I don't know. It's locked in the desk." "May I see it?" He studied her across the lamplight for a long moment, not suspicious, just searching. "You understand accounts." "I understand when numbers start pretending," Callie said. "Men make them do it." He went still, and something in his face shifted, surprise, and beneath it, something that looked almost like relief, like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying alone far too long. He rose and crossed to the mantel clock, where a small key hung on a nail behind it, and unlocked the box that held the original loan papers. Callie spread the documents flat across the table, weighted the corners with a cup and the salt jar, and began, line by line, number by number, to search for exactly where the lie was hiding. The lamp burned lower. The house settled around them, wood ticking softly in the cold. And somewhere in that quiet, patient work, Callie Shaw stopped feeling like a stranger borrowing a stranger's kitchen table, and started feeling like a woman standing guard over a home that might, one day soon, need defending. She had no way of knowing yet how soon. Because on a ridge above Cedar Hollow, a black horse waited in the dark, and its rider had already decided the quiet girl from the east had seen more than she was meant to. The knock came on the 3rd afternoon. Ezra was gone checking fence line, and Callie knew before she opened the door that it would not be neighborly. 3 hard strikes. Not patient. Not polite. She found Bo Whitfield on the porch, rain darkening the brim of his hat, 2 silent riders waiting behind him on horses that stamped and blew in the wet. Sam stood just behind her in the doorway, tense as a drawn rope. "Miss Shaw," Bo said, smiling the way a man smiles when he already believes he's won. "My father hates to make trouble with neighbors." "That must comfort the neighbors," Callie said. His jaw ticked. He held out a folded paper. "A kind adjustment. Coltrane signs, my father drops the disputed fees. In return, he agrees not to question any past dealings between our families." She didn't take it. "Mr. Coltrane isn't here." "I think you have more say over him than you let on." "I think Mr. Coltrane has his own mind." Bo leaned in, voice dropping low enough that only she and Sam could hear. "You're a long way from home, Miss Shaw. No family here. No name of your own yet, whatever Coltrane's promised you. If this goes badly, he loses land. You lose the only roof that's ever asked you to sit down at supper. Think on which one of you has more to risk." The words found old bruises with terrible aim. For one breath she was back on the platform at Willow Bend, alone, unwanted, a girl with nothing but a case and a cruel letter. Then she thought of the latch on her door. The chair pulled out for her at breakfast. Sam's freckled face lighting up when she told him his father had been wrong about him. "I've thought on it," she said. "I came west with no standing either. And here I am." Bo's smile thinned to nothing. He tossed the folded paper onto the porch boards, turned, and rode off into the rain without looking back, but not before Callie caught the silver conch flashing dull on his horse's black bridle. Sam had gone very still beside her. "That's the same horse," he said quietly. "The same silver piece. I've seen it before." Callie turned to him. "Before when, Sam?" The boy's young face had gone hard in a way boys' faces shouldn't have to. "The day before Miss Rosalind took sick. I was up in the loft. Heard voices by the back door, hers and a man's. She sounded mad. Not scared. Mad. I only saw the horse when he left." Callie's blood went cold. "Why didn't you tell Ezra?" "Because 2 days later she was dying," Sam whispered. "And after, Mr. Ezra looked like if one more hard thing touched him, he'd fall clean through the floor. I didn't want to be the one who broke him." That night, when Ezra came home mud-soaked and grim to find the porch letter on the table, Callie told him everything: Bo's visit, his threat, Sam's memory of the black horse the day before Rosalind fell ill. Ezra's face went the color of old ash. He crossed to the locked box, and this time, beneath the loan papers, he found something he hadn't looked for in 2 years, a narrow envelope, yellowed, sealed once and reopened, tucked beneath Rosalind's photograph. Across the front, in faded ink, Cyrus Whitfield. "I only read it once," he said, voice rough. "The night after we buried her." He unfolded it with hands that weren't quite steady, and set it before Callie. "Mr. Whitfield, I will not sign what you sent. My husband does not know of your offer, and I will not have him pressured while grief still sits in this house. The south pasture was my father's before it was mine. I brought it into this marriage freely, and I will not have it taken by clever wording. If you come again while Ezra is away, I will tell him everything." The date sat beneath her name, 3 days before the fever that killed her. He tried to buy her silence, Callie said slowly, and she refused him. "She never told me," Ezra said, and something in his voice cracked open, not anger exactly, something older and sadder. "I was already carrying too much that year. My mother had just passed. Cattle prices dropped. She was carrying a child we lost before winter came. I think she was trying to spare me one more weight." Callie didn't reach for his hand. Grief was a room a person had to be invited into. "She trusted you," she said instead. "That's why she carried it alone." He looked at her a long moment, something raw and unguarded showing through the careful quiet he usually kept. "How do you know that?" "Because I was angry at my mother for dying, once," Callie said. "Then ashamed of the anger. Then angry at myself for the shame. It goes in circles for years if nobody opens a window. You opened one, he said quietly. 3 days of uneasy waiting followed, Cyrus Whitfield's silence louder and more frightening than any threat Bo could have shouted. Then a notice arrived by Ryder, delivered by a shaking Mrs. Odell from the church, who'd opened it by accident thinking it addressed to her husband. Full balance on the South Pasture note, due in 10 days, unless Ezra signed the settlement. 10 days isn't strength, Callie said, reading it twice. It's panic wearing a good coat. They decided to ride for the county seat at Larkspur Crossing themselves rather than wait for a lawyer to wander out to them, Callie insisting she come, over Ezra's protests, because the ledger discrepancies were hers to explain and no clerk would take a stranger's word over her own. It's dangerous, Ezra said. So is sitting here while Whitfield writes the ending without us, Callie answered. They left before dawn, papers wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in the lining of Callie's travel bag, taking the High Miners Trail instead of the main road after spotting 2 riders waiting near the crossing below, one on a familiar black horse. Snow found them on the pass by afternoon, forcing them to shelter beneath a canvas wedged between rocks, sharing a heel of bread and a piece of dried apple cake Mrs. Odell had pressed into Callie's hands at the last minute. It was there, huddled against the cold, that Ezra told her how Rosalind used to pour peach syrup over biscuits to remember summer in the dead of winter, and Callie told him her mother had done the very same thing. For a long time, Ezra said, watching the snow, I thought remembering her meant keeping everything exactly as grief left it. Same empty chair. Same photograph turned face down. And now? Now you stood her picture back up without asking anything of it, he said. You didn't push her out of this house. You made room for her to stop haunting it. Callie's throat ached. Maybe grief only haunts where it isn't allowed to sit. They reached a stage relay station by dusk, spent from the cold, and were given space in the stable loft by a one-eyed keeper named Higgins who asked no questions worth answering. But a rider came in after dark, tired horse, tired voice, asking whether 2 travelers had passed through. Bo Whitfield. Callie hid the papers deep in a torn sack of oats and covered them with straw while, below, Ezra walked out to meet him with empty hands. Where is she? Bo demanded from his saddle, rain-dark cloak hanging off his shoulders. Resting, Ezra said. You'll speak to me. I'd rather speak to the girl who thinks herself clever. Bo raised his voice toward the loft. You're a long way from home, Miss Shaw. Think carefully who has more to lose here. Callie climbed down before fear could talk her out of it, stepping into the lantern light beside Ezra. I've thought carefully, she said. I think you rode here in the dark because you're afraid of what daylight will show. Higgins, unlit pipe between his teeth, watched from the office doorway, missing nothing. Bo's composure cracked at the edges, enough that even his own hired riders exchanged an uneasy glance he didn't catch, but Higgins did. This mercy won't come twice, Bo warned, wheeling his horse. It was never mercy, Callie called after him. They found him the next morning, thrown from his horse on a treacherous shortcut he'd taken trying to beat them to Larkspur Crossing, pinned beneath a fallen branch, his mount screaming, one foreleg wedged between stones. His composure was gone entirely now, replaced by pain and a fear that made him, for the first time since Callie had met him, look genuinely young. Don't just stand there, he gasped. Help me. Ezra stood over him for one long breath. Here was the man who had threatened his home, hunted his wife's memory, followed them through snow with a folded lie in his coat. Here he was now, helpless on frozen ground. "We're not like them," Callie said quietly. Ezra knelt and lifted the branch. They worked the horse free together, Callie speaking low nonsense to calm the trembling animal while Ezra and Higgins levered the stone away with a fallen limb. When it was done, Bo sat in the snow, breathing hard, staring at the two people he'd spent a week trying to ruin. "Why help me?" he asked, genuinely baffled. "Because if we left you here," Callie said, "your father wouldn't be the only one who had to live with that." Something shifted behind Bo's eyes then, not gratitude exactly, but the first crack Callie had seen in him. Sometimes a crack in pride was the first place light got in. Larkspur Crossing was loud and smoke-hazed, wagons rattling over rutted streets, telegraph poles marching along the road like thin crosses against the sky. The county clerk, a narrow, ink-stained man named Whit Marsh, Mrs. Odell's brother, compared the filed transfer schedule against Bo's demand notice and went pale. "This one lists no insurance fee," he said, tapping the county record. "That one does." "A charge added after filing," Callie said. "Which means the public record doesn't support what Whitfield's bank is demanding." By nightfall they'd hired a broad, tired-eyed lawyer named Hollis Greer, who read every page twice before leaning back in his chair. "Cyrus Whitfield's been too clever," he said. "The false fee alone can stop the note from being called. Rosalind's letter and the church record show a pattern of pressure. And this settlement offer," he tapped it, "a man doesn't ask someone to stop asking questions unless he's afraid of the answers." The next morning, Whitfield's own bank printed a notice in the Larkspur paper naming Ezra delinquent and calling Callie an unidentified Eastern woman exerting improper influence. Ezra's hands shook with fury reading it. "He put his fear in print," Greer said, almost pleased. "That's his first real mistake." By afternoon, Judge Adelia Cross had agreed to an emergency hearing. Whitfield's attorney argued smoothly that Callie was unqualified to speak on financial matters. "Unqualified in what respect?" the judge asked, sharp-eyed over her spectacles. "She has no formal training." "Can she read?" "I presume so." "Can she subtract?" A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom. Cyrus Whitfield's face didn't change, but his hand closed slowly over the head of his cane. Callie stood and explained it plainly, exact dates, exact fees, exact clause missing from the county record, without once defending her right to speak, only the truth itself. "This court will not permit foreclosure based on a fee absent from the recorded instrument," Judge Cross ruled. "Temporary injunction granted. I am ordering the bank's transfer records produced for review." It was not the end. But it was a day one, and a day was something. They rode home slower, tired down to the bone, and found the cottonwoods of Cedar Hollow waiting gold in the late light. Sam was off the porch before they'd reached the yard, hugging Callie so hard she laughed for the first time in a week. That evening, with supper cleared and Sam finally asleep, Ezra dried the last bowl beside her at the sink and said her name in a way that made the whole kitchen go still. "Callie. There's a thing I need to say before more trouble finds a way in." A knock interrupted him. Soft. Uncertain. Not Bo's hard warning, not a neighbor's brisk rhythm. A woman stood on the porch in a damp traveling cloak, gloved hands trembling around a bundle of papers, eyes red from a long ride. "My name is Nell Osgood," she said. "I kept house for Cyrus Whitfield 12 years. Her voice caught. "I know what happened to Rosalind Coltrane. I should have spoken sooner." Nell sat at the kitchen table with the packet clutched to her chest like the only solid thing in the room. "I was there the day Rosalind came to his office demanding Bo leave her be," she said. Mr. Whitfield laughed after she left. "Said pride made folks easier to break, they'd rather starve quiet than ask for help loud." Her eyes filled looking at Rosalind's photograph on the mantel. When she took sick, he said the fever had saved him an argument. Ezra's jaw went tight enough to ache. Callie reached over and simply set her hand flat on the table near his, not touching, just present. Nell unfolded a private ledger she'd copied before leaving Whitfield's service years before, names, dates, pressure points listed beside every ranch he'd meant to take. Beside Cedar Hollow, in his own cramped hand, Rosalind refuses. And beneath it, the final page, a draft agreement to transfer the South pasture to a railroad land agent, dated for the following month. It hadn't been a debt dispute at all. It had been a plan, years in the making, waiting for grief and silence to finish what pressure alone couldn't. She stood against him alone, Ezra said, staring at his dead wife's name on the page. "No," Callie said softly. She stood first. Not alone anymore. The following morning, Greer rode out with a deputy and Judge Cross's signed order. Nell gave her statement at the kitchen table. Sam gave his about the black horse and the silver conch. Mrs. Odell gave hers, back straight, voice steady. Cyrus Whitfield did not go quietly, but half the town watched from porches as the deputy read the seizure order outside his own bank. Bo, one arm still in a sling, looked away when his father searched for him in the crowd. That was not justice complete. But it was the first stone falling from a wall built to look unbreakable. The investigation opened more doors than anyone expected, other ranches, other false fees, other families who believed they were the only ones. Whitfield's holdover Larkspur Crossing did not collapse in a single dramatic day. It came apart the way most true things do, slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to stand on. By spring, the South pasture was cleared entirely, and Ezra paid the honest balance with cattle money and a fair note from a bank that finally had reason to deal fairly. The wedding came in late April, when the cottonwoods had just begun to leaf and the creek ran loud with snowmelt. Reverend Odell stood beneath the porch roof while rain threatened all morning and then, at the last moment, held off, as if even the sky had decided the house deserved one gentle hour. Callie wore her blue dress, mended at the cuffs. Sam stood beside Ezra trying hard not to cry and failing completely. Nell Osgood stood near the steps, quieter than the rest, and when Callie thanked her, she only shook her head. "Thank you for being brave before I managed to be," Nell said. "Maybe bravery's like a lantern," Callie answered. "One person carries it first, and then everyone else can see the path." When the Reverend asked if she came by her own choice, Callie thought of the train platform, the letter that had once told her there was no place for her anywhere. She thought of a latched door, a chair pulled out at breakfast, snow on a mountain pass, a branch lifted off an enemy's chest, a housekeeper's trembling confession. "I do," she said. "By my own choice." That evening, once the house had emptied and settled into quiet, Callie climbed the stairs to her old room one last time. The latch still worked. The wildflowers were long gone, but the chipped blue cup remained on the desk. She took her aunt's letter from the drawer and read the cruel line one final time. "You are not needed here anymore." Then she carried it downstairs and fed it to the stove, not in anger, but because she no longer needed it to prove what she'd survived. Ezra took her hand as the flame caught. Outside, the creek ran bright under the moon, past the cottonwoods, past the pasture Rosalind had refused to give away, past the porch where a frightened girl had once arrived with nothing but a case and a choice nobody had ever offered her before. She had come west looking only for shelter. She had found a home instead, built not from walls or land or locked doors, but from truth, and kindness, and the plain, stubborn courage to stay.